Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host, and as you can see, guess what? I've got a voters pamphlet in my hand. What it says on the Multnomah County elections, May 18th, 2021. Special district election. Right, there's an election here. And right up front with you, you've received your ballot in the mail, and it looks like this. It looks like this. There's the ballot in the mail aspect of it, and there's quite a bit of information in there. But the main thing about this particular piece is that there's the ballot inside of that particular envelope. And right up front with you, it's listed there, Educational Service District, and then the school districts itself. And the school district, and on the back of it, there's the let's see, where is it? The ballot measure, I guess, the Oregon Historical Society. Let me get my glasses on, folks. I apologize for that. At that point in my life, I've got to wear those. Okay, 26-221, 5-year levy, Oregon Historical Society, Library, Museum, Educational Program. So that's your ballot. Make sure you turn it over to look at it. It's so easy to forget it, because normally you just see the ballot on the front end, and then it looks like there's nothing, just but the scribbling, but that's very, very important. It talks about the Historical Society, and it's normally a 5-year levy kind of a deal. And it's well worth you looking at it, but in all due respect, please sign and say yes, because it supports the Historical Society in all of the various counties here within our area. Okay, all right. Okay, that's done. We got that done. Now, what we're going to do today, naturally, we want to discuss the school board. We want to discuss the Portland School Board. Education is a very key component here within our lifestyle. Very, very important. And so what we're going to do, we're going to give you some background, sort of educate you a little bit about what is the school board and a little bit more factual information aspect of it. And then we're going to get into those individuals who are running for office. We've got several people that are running for office. We're going to sort of share some information about those individuals with my guest today, and then there was another person that within our immediate area, PCC, Portland Community College. As you know, they play quite a role in our educational system aspect of it. And one of our dear friend, Dan Salzman, former Portland Commissioner, City Commissioner, is running, if you will, for Director Zone number 4 of all things. He's running for it. He wants to get back in the routine, like someone else that I know very familiar. And I'm getting ready to introduce him to you, okay? And I'm talking about my dear friend, and you've seen him before on Oregon Voters Digest. And for those who are new, you will get to know who he is. This gentleman has quite a bit of background. He's got quite a history. If anybody knows community, if anybody knows education, if anybody knows Portland School Board, if anybody knows education in the state of Oregon, and even in the state of Washington for that matter. I mean, really, he's a jewel when it comes to education within our community. He knows it all. He knows the ups, the downs, those individuals who are running, the activities for a number of years. I'd say 40 plus years. I want to say 40 plus years he's been in this system and whatever. So again, here's my dear friend, Steve Buel. Steve, how you doing?
Doing fine. It's an overly generous introduction.
Well, hey, it's well worth it, Steve. Trust me, it's well worth it. And I think you're looking well. Look like you're enjoying your retirement. Ordinarily, I would see folks with your background pretty well, I mean, all out of the deal, wheelchairs and all. But you, under no circumstance, in fact, I think you may be running right now. I've got to make it very clear to the people who are looking at this show that, in all due respect, you might be getting to write-in, Steve. I think they're going to be getting to write-in after we get through doing this.
2 more years before I can run.
Well, watch it now, because if you do get the numbers, what do you do then? What do you do then, Steve? Anyway, welcome aboard, Steve. Appreciate it. Okay, got me? So why don't we start off, Steve, in all due respect, let's share with them, again, this is educational background anyway, share with the viewing audiences here your background and just how did you get into this particular business of education and then that history that you bring to the table. Okay, got me?
Well, way back in 1974, I was teaching U.S. government at Clackamas High School, And I thought, gee, I'm teaching government to kids. How come I'm not going down and checking out my own school board? So I went down in 1974, early 1975, and said, hey, what do we got here? And boy, I was like, wow, we have some problems here. Nice people, but problems. And so I decided I'd get oriented towards the school board. I went to every school board meeting for a couple of years, beginning to end, and then I decided, well, I'll run. And in 1976, I did and lost. And then I kept at it for another 3 years, going to every school board meeting. And then I ran in 1979 and won. And that's what really got me going. And I served with some really great people. Of course, the main person, of course, is Herb Cawthorn, and we co-authored the desegregation plan, which really wasn't a desegregation plan, but was a plan to make the 10 predominantly schools that were the 10 predominantly black schools better, way better. And so people could feel like they could send their kids to the neighborhood in those schools. And that's been an interest of mine for years now, ever since, really, trying to make things better for all children, but also for kids of color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
Then 30 years later, I got reelected again in 2013 and spent 2 years just frustrated with the people on the board with me. And then for the last 2 years, we actually got some things accomplished.
Okay. Well, tell me something. As far as the school board is concerned, we want to probably focus in this area because we want to really actually talk about the candidacy and the upcoming issues as it relates to the election aspect of it. But if I were to ask you just what is the definition of a school board and its impact?
Well, the school board itself has full control over the schools in its district within the law and within their own policy. And it's kind of confusing to some people, but even when people get on the school board, they don't really seem to understand that you have 4 votes in the school board, you can pretty much do anything. You can do anything you want within the law, state, federal law, and so forth, and you have to stay within your own policies. And this is really confusing for people who get on the school board. They come in, and often the first thing that happens is people try and tell them how to be a school board member. You know, the people on the school board right now in Portland, the superintendent took them off to Harvard to teach them how to be a school board member. And one of the things that the Oregon School Board Association tries to teach them is you're really not in charge. It's really the superintendent. Your job is to hire the superintendent and to monitor the superintendent's work and to make policy. But that's all garbage. That they try to keep the school boards under control of that.
We're having a
Really,
little
the
technical.
school board-
Just bear with us. We're having a little technical difficulties right now, but we'll have that.
Am I okay?
Yes, I think you're okay. Just keep talking.
Okay, well, in the one of the first things they did in the last school board in Portland is they took them off to Harvard to teach them to be school board members. And then the Oregon School Board Association tries to teach them the same thing. This is your limitations and so forth. When in actuality, that's not the case. Oregon state law says, hey, you're in charge. You get 4 votes, you do anything you want within the law. And so that confuses a lot of people, I think.
And what about the duties of a school board member? What are the duties and how many hours do you spend? I know.
Well, the actual duty is your job as a school board member is to do the best you can to make the schools as good as you can. And you can put into it what you want. You can go to the meetings, not do too much work, and maybe do 10, 20 hours a week. But some school board members, like Paul Anthony, who was on the school board, geez, he was probably working 60-hour weeks or even more than that. It just depends on how much you want to put into it and how much you really, in a way, it depends on how much you know. Because the more you know, the more things you see that you need to be able to work with and to work with. And so you can go 60 hours, you can go 50 hours, you can go 10 hours a week.
And you know, one of the other areas that people are very interested in, the CBOs, you know, normally that's the name These community-based organizations, what is a community-based organization, and how many of those organizations are the school board responsible for or working with?
Well, the school board can work with whoever they want. And one of the things that's happened in Portland and also now in the state is the CBOs, organizations in the community, they want to be influential just like people do. And so they want the school board to recognize them as being influential and important. And what the problem, there's a little problem that comes about with this. One is that they don't really have any authority within the schools, and they also really don't always know what's going on in the schools. And so it creates sometimes it creates problems. And there's a big movement in this school board election, even trying to get people of color on the school board, and which is a good movement. Rita Moore, she said, hey, I'm not going to run if there's a good person of color. There's a person of color running, I'm not going to run for the school board. So race has become a big issue in this school board race that's going on now. But there's a little problem in that you really have to fix the schools, in my opinion, within the schools. You can't fix them outside of the schools. You can get support and help from the CBOs, but they can't come into the school and tell people what to do, or they're not the superintendent, they're not the school board. And so you have to be careful to not depend on them for your fixes of the problems in the schools. And that's kind of getting mixed up a little. Even the state legislature here recently passed, I believe they had a big bill out that was trying to spend more state money into the CBOs. Well, if I'm a CBO guy, yeah, I want to get money from the government, absolutely. Absolutely. But at the same time, they're not the solution. They're the support. And I think that sometimes that's confusing for people, and it's very confusing right now on the school board election, because you hear a lot of talk about, oh, the CBO is this or the CBO is that, or this is where we want to spend money, and it's not necessarily a fix, in my opinion.
Steve, can you give us an example or a sampling of a CBO?
Well, the SEI has their own, for a long time, the SEI had their own school, but they have come and wanted to be influential in the schools, like in Harriet Tubman. And they were very influential in Harriet Tubman, but they're not in charge of Harriet Tubman. And so if you rely on them, not rely on the people within the schools to make sure Harriet Tubman works well, it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Now, SEI, now you gave me the acronym. Now, what is that? That's SEI. What is SEI?
Okay, now I'm freezing up on that.
But I'm saying both. That's what I was trying. I want to make sure for the benefit of the viewing audience. Let's see. But we know about Tony Hobson, and we know about a lot of the things that he's done with the school over there, and predominantly they're black, right? In many ways, they're black aspect of it. They've been around for a few years too.
They haven't been around for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own school, middle school, for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I'm just freezing up on the SEI name. Getting older, I guess, over here, Bruce. We've only dealt with them for about 20 or 30 years.
I know that, and I've known him too. And all due respect to Tony, I mean, just keep on going. Understand, we know where you are.
Nobody refers to them with anything but SEI.
That's right. They're well known for a number of the achievements that they've done and whatever. And I think that's a very interesting piece. And then you've given some more background about that situation. But do you see what about the futures of these CBOs? Is this something you think is going to be around? And any thoughts about that?
Oh yeah, they are going to be around for a long time, and they're very, very important out in the community.
Okay.
The only problem I have with them is that they're not the school system.
Okay.
They are the community, and so in that case, you want to be careful. But it's not. It's a minor problem, but it is a problem.
But again, like you said, there are other CBOs in the area that work with the school district, right? Right?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of them, and generally most of them that come into play are ethnic, have an ethnic background of some sort.
Right.
Either black or Asian or Latino. They're all, there's a lot of them, and there's also people will develop their own and put their own community organization, and then try and get a relationship with the schools.
Any ideas in terms of when did they come into prominence of the school district, if you will? Because I think when I think about myself and how I went to school, there was no such animal, out there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and what was their rationale? And are they you said something about that piece, but all the benefit.
Community. A perfect example was Matt Morton was the head of a organization called NAIA when I was on the school board, and it works with Native American kids, and they had a lot of kids in his school, which had taken over an ex-school that had been closed out on Columbia Boulevard, and he was on the school board, and the school board gave a lot of money to NAIA, $100,000, and they did some really good work. And he probably did a very good job running it. But I went to Matt Morton once and said, hey, Matt, let's do the people who have really been at the bottom for the last 40 years in the school system are Native American kids, in bottom in terms of testing and so forth, and graduation. They're at the bottom. And I said, geez, Matt, you must have some good ideas on what to do with how to help Native American kids in the school system. And I said, look, I'll back anything you want. And we were really on opposite poles on all sorts of stuff, Matt Morton and I were. And I said, I'll back anything you want for Native American kids in Portland Public Schools. And anything, you name it, we'll do it. And with our 2 votes, we could do whatever we wanted, period. And we could have too. And he just brushed me off. Now here is a Native American guy on the school board whose whole life and business and so forth were had to do with Native American students, and yet he wasn't in the least bit interested in doing anything within the school system. And that's one of the problems. The school system needs to take care of the children in the school system with support from the CBOs, but not have them control everything, or even have them control hardly anything, because they don't have the responsibility nor the authority to do what they within the schools. And people get confused on that. It's a big issue in this election right now.
Well, what about that curriculum? Who approves that? I mean, who approves? Don't they have to go through the process to get funded?
The curriculum all theoretically comes out of the school board. The CBOs don't really have any responsibility within the school board. They're within the schools. They're really just support. But people are saying, okay, people are often saying in this election, they are kind of the answer. But I'm just saying, no, they're not the answer. Because they're not really part of the school system. They're the supports that you can get from them, which are wonderful in many, many cases. But it's just, I just think it's a small problem. Go ahead on to something else.
Another thing that's a little somewhat confusing, and there's another entity out there, whether they be a CBO or not, it's like homeschooling. When you hear this word about homeschooling all the time, I mean, how do they fit in this whole menagerie aspect of it? And I'm asking you all these various questions about that piece because, as you know, Portland Public Schools has pretty well been defined as a failure in many ways. And I'm just throwing it out there. And so consequently, these same entities that you're talking about trying to address the issue, whether they blacks, Asian, or this, that, and other, it comes back to at the table on an ongoing basis. They're failing, and we're not achieving. What's up?
Well, you have 3 other groups really. You have charter schools, and
Right.
Portland themselves support some charter schools. They really are, and they make huge decisions about charter schools. That comes through the state. You've got the vouchers,
Okay.
which is it's kind of a Republican thing in a way. We want school vouchers. Nancy DeVos, who was the for under Trump, who was the head of the education department in the federal government, she was a big voucher fan. And a lot of people, the problem with the vouchers is that if you're well-to-do, you can get those vouchers,
Mm.
and you you're saving that. And those vouchers draw money away from the public schools, see,
Mm.
and that's a lot of the problem. And the homeschooling is just a way to, okay, I don't like the school system, I'm gonna just teach my kid at home. And homeschooling is, nobody has any, that I know, even has any problem with it. If you want to do it, people have hugely different opinions on it, but you can do it in the state of Oregon if you want. They don't, basically, if it's still correct, and I think I'm still correct, I'm 100% sure, but pretty much the state of Oregon doesn't monitor much homeschooling. Mm-mm. You can do, and I've known instances where they just let the kids run around the yard, basically, for during the day. No real homeschooling in the homeschooling, but generally, homeschooling people do a really good job often with their children because they care enough about it. They have their kids home all day
Right.
to school them. But the vouchers, and Oregon doesn't have a real charter school problem the same way that some places in some countries, in some states, other states do. We're okay. It's not a problem really. I don't think very much the charter schools, but the vouchers could be a huge problem. We're very destructive of public education the voucher system.
Okay. Let's talk about the school board. You get quite a responsible job for that matter. And I've gone to a number of the meetings myself, and there are many subject matters across the board. They're very intense at times to speak of and whatever. And I guess I'd like for you to respond to that. Maybe you can highlight maybe some of the some of the meetings, if you will, that you felt were very, very important, and you saw the turnouts and this, that, and the other, and then also the results. Would you like to share?
Well, there's a couple of tricky things about school board, big on a school board, I think. And one is that you have to make some decisions about what it is that you want to actually get done as a school board member. Or are you just sitting there trying to make this, just kind of be the person who kind of okays things as they go along? Uh, and it makes a huge difference with a school board member whether or not they care about what's happening, whether they know about what's happening, and what it is they would like to get done. And so you go on the school board often with this great idea, I'm going to get all these things done, but then pretty soon you find out that it's not so easy to do it. In fact, educators are notorious, in my opinion, for not wanting to make changes. And so change becomes very difficult. And in order to really get change really going, you have to sacrifice some things on the school board. Otherwise, you're just kind of going along and you figure, okay, let the superintendent run the stuff and off you go. And if the superintendent's really good, maybe they do really good. Matt Prophet, who was superintendent that you and I both knew in the 80s, was terrific. The school board didn't have to do anything. The guy we have now, Guerrero, he's a nice guy, I think, but he's not very oriented to what's going on in the schools as opposed to like what's going on in the national levels of this convention or that thing or how it looks nationally or those things. And so the school board really, if they were doing their job, they'd be focusing him better on what's going on in the schools in Portland, not so much worrying about this group, this national group or this, or having basically what's a national curriculum, the Common Core, and what they don't, or doing all the testing. They would be focusing more on what was happening in the schools themselves. And so the school board members got to make some decisions about that. Where does she or he land? Are they willing to stand out? Paul Anthony is a great example. He stood up again and again for stuff in the schools that was not popular, but it would have been great if they'd have done it all. But so you get on the school, and most people go in with the idea, I'm going to be, I'm going to stand up and so forth. But you find out it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to not go along with the other people. It's pretty hard to not go along with the school administration. And the last group of people that we've had, there's 7 of them, I think all pretty nice people. Not very many of them stood up on stuff. Julia Brim Edwards, who's running this time, a lot of people says she did, but yeah, I like Julia Brim Edwards, think she's a nice person, but I sure don't trust her judgment on educational matters. And she stood up for the wrong things often. And so that all becomes something that depends on the individual member on the school board. And it's easy to kind of sell out, so to speak, to come right on and put all the stuff that you campaigned on behind you, because you want to stay, as Paul Anthony says, a person of influence. You want to be able to be important and influential. A perfect example of this was Rita Moore, who I knew for years and supported her and endorsed her and gave her a little chunk of money because I figured she was going to be great because she had the right attitudes. She came on with the right attitudes. We need to do this. And about a week after she was on the school board, all of a sudden, all those right attitudes were kind of out the window. And what became important was being important. And what became important often for school board members is not the children, but the adults in the system, the other adults in the school board, the other adults in the administration. And that's the biggest flaw that creates problems. Now, some people would say that's great because it makes things go along smoother. Yeah, but if you're going down the wrong road, you don't want to go along smoother. You want to have somebody disrupt you and say, hey, this is the wrong road. We want to go down this road instead. And it's a problem, and it becomes the problem. And most people don't know how strong it is. It's real nice to have everybody kind of kowtow. Oh, Director Buel. Oh, Director Buel. Nice to see you, Director Buel. Yes, you're looking good today, Director Buel. And all that type of stuff. And it's really hard to turn around and look yourself in the mirror in the morning and say, I got to remember this is about children. It's not about the adults. It's about the children. It's a very difficult thing to do, and very few people are successful. Paul Anthony was. Your friend of mine, Herb Cawthorn, years and years ago was. I can name a couple other people who were. But boy, I'm hard-pressed to name a lot of people who have really walked in and said, okay, the kids are really the most important thing, and then they kept the kids as the most important thing.
Hey,
problem.
You mentioned Matt Prophet, and I think about Matchett. I mean, these are kind of people that just really stand out aspect of it. But I know you had there was some time that you'd spent during the at the time era aspect of it. And you also mentioned Matt Prophet. And why was there such a difference or a distinction? What was it? Why did you mention the Matt Prophet of the world?
Prophet is, in my opinion, the best superintendent we've had in the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And he was not only the best superintendent because, for several reasons, one, he was very bright, and two, he had the right attitudes, in my opinion, about people. He increased administrators who were women. He increased administrators of color. He did a lot of that type of work. But what Prophet really did was he kept kids up front more than anybody I've ever seen. And when he left, and you did this wonderful interview with him, and I believe it was 1991, might have been 1990, as he was leaving, about the only long interview anybody ever did with him. And he talked about what he'd done. He'd moved $40 million into the classroom out of the administration. It was a lot of money back in the early 1990s. But he did something else. He had black children were testing in reading at 56% of the national average. 56%. You know what they're testing in reading now? Black children in Portland, 17%. Black children in mathematics were testing at 48% in Portland Public Schools when Matt Prophet was finishing up his tenure as superintendent. Today, they're, I don't know, they're like 9 or 11. Can't remember which. And so there was a difference in what he was doing to what we've been doing. And the main difference was he was putting kids right at the front. And he also had this sense of really, really trying to do stuff that worked together that was going to come out well. And I don't know, there hadn't been anybody since then to do that. I mean, we're at 17% with those children now. 17%.
Wow. Well, Steve, you know,
what are we doing different? So what are we doing different?
Yeah, right.
Something different. The main difference is that we're not engaging children in school like we used to as well as we used to. Engaging children in school is the key. It's the key to kids reading. It's the key to kids doing that. It's the key to everything for those children to get them engaged. And we have moved in the United States in the last 20 years, we've moved from this testing, the testing, Common Core testing, standards-based education. For about the last 20 years, we've moved that way, probably 18 years. And it's not been a success. And a lot of major educational leaders across the country who aren't making money off of it are saying it's not a success. But in Portland, we have a superintendent, like I say, maybe a very nice guy. He doesn't talk to me, but he's a testing guy. And so we do the SPAC test, which is horrible. We added testing in the last couple of years. And it's not the way to go. And it doesn't work. And you can see that it doesn't work. And when people say, hey, it's not working for Portland Public Schools, a lot of that is why it's not working. Now it's working in some schools. You know, you and I both know that the schools in the more well-to-do neighborhoods in Portland do better than the schools in the poor neighborhoods. Now that was changing under Prophet. They had some wonderful schools that were in poor neighborhoods, but in fact, Ronnie Herndon was at the school board meeting and commented on that about a year and a half ago, and saying, hey, how come we can't have schools like this anymore? Well, there's reasons. And the reasons are that we're doing this national things around testing and around the Common Core and all this stuff instead of getting children involved in their education. So it's a problem. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some great teachers in Portland. There's tons of them.
Okay,
but as a system, that's not a system. And a lot of those great teachers, we're making them worse, not better, because of that.
You know, there's been a major concern about the points that you were making, Steve, and you've always been on top of them. Not only when you were just a teacher, or not only when you were on the board, just even when you were not on the board, you were still there on an ongoing basis for the years that I've known of you, aspect of it. So and then you see the failure rates going up. You've already made the point about Matt Prophet aspect of it, and when he was there and was concerned, and I saw that too because I was here during that particular time. And then, but since then, though, just like you said, I mean, we've got a major problem, but we're getting the monies. I mean, taxpayers are paying. I mean, the monies are there, aspect of it. So what do we do? I mean, I guess the point I'm making is that, and this is for the benefit of those, for the voters this time around, and for those folks who are running for office. I mean, with your background and what you have shared, how do they get that background so that they, in fact, are committed, if you will, that when they sign and say, I'm running for the school board aspect of it, they got the background, necessary background to do the job?
Well, Now, there are a couple people that have pretty good background in the schools. The the woman that I really think makes sense is Jamie Golden Kale, who never signed up, but she's running a write-in campaign. She has a really good background. I've read her stuff or seen her talk a little, and man, she's saying a lot of really important things in the schools. But once you get by her, the general background isn't that great. Now, there are some people, for instance, Gary Holland's wife works for the school system. Well, he's going to have a background. My wife, worked for the school system. When I first went on the school board, then she left and got out of town. She was smart enough to not stick around with me being on the school board. But I'm sure he's got a good background in schools. He went through the schools, had kids in the schools, so he's got a good background in the schools. What they don't understand is that there's the system is some degree different than just the schools in general. You can send your kid to school, but you don't know how the system works because of that. It's different. For instance, there's this huge move to get, like I said, people of color on the school board, and which is a good move. I'm all for it. I think it's great. But lost you, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay.
I can't see you. Just a second. I'm going to see if I can see.
Just keep talking. Just keep talking.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right.
Just keep talking.
What I was saying.
Just keep talking.
In his case, he says some really nice things, and he has a good background. And the fact that he's black gives him a background that's beyond anything, say, that I could ever do. I have little or no. I have no idea what it is to be black, say, in America today. So he's got that. But when you go on, but there's more to it than that. There's all the things, the way the school system works, that he needs to develop a background in that too, because the problem isn't always about race. It's also about a lot of other things, educational things. It's about how the system responds to race, how the system responds to economics, how the system responds to getting children to do better in school, and so forth and so forth. So there's a lot more to it. So everybody brings their own background. Some of it is really good, some of it's not so good. But the tough part is trying to get a background in the school stuff. The only thing you do, you got to pay attention. And people go on and think they have it. That's part of the problem. They think that they have that background. They went through the system themselves. They had their children in the system, but they didn't teach in the system, say, or they didn't study the system. They haven't gone to school board meetings for the last few years. Well, Jamie Golden Kale has, and she worked in the system, and so she's going to have that background, and so she knows more about the problems and what can be brought about and what can be improved. It's tough. It's a tough thing. You got people who just maybe lived in Portland for a couple of years, really great people. I really like a guy by the name of Dan Rogers who's running. He was a doctor out in East County. Boy, he's really a great guy. Smart, nice, but he's only been here a couple of years in Portland. So how well can you know the school in 2 years if you haven't gone to school board meetings, haven't read up on it, haven't followed it, don't know the history? It's tough. It's tough. So not everybody's really a good candidate.
Well, Steve, one of the things that comes to mind also too is that we've talked about this before when you were on the board, and the idea that it looked like to me would be more effective getting to these folks when they're thinking about running for office and whatever, and be a little bit more engaged if the district, if Portland was districtized, if the school board members were in a district, in a respective district, if you will, that means people will really reach out to them. Because I sense a fear of some sort. People don't know just who's representing them. The only person that's pretty well recognized in the Portland Public Schools is the superintendent. You always see him on TV, and they ask them a question from a media standpoint, but you don't see anyone. Only time you see a person like yourself, well, you're reaching out on an ongoing basis, but you're a rarity, if you will. But the rest of the folks, it's you just don't know who they are, and then they present them in like the voters pamphlet right here. You present them, and you just mention. You said Holland. I looked at his background. He's got educational background. But, you know, and then I look at the other candidates, other than Judy Edwards. I don't know these folks, and I've been around. Suppose that's what I'm supposed to do.
You've been around. You got to study it, I guess. I've spent a lot of hours reading the voter pamphlet, watching people on Zoom meetings or doing and paying attention, doing Facebook, and you get it's like any voting situation. Whereas if you go to let's say the community college people, I don't know. I know a couple now that I met a couple who were on there when I was on the school board, but yeah. Now what you're talking about a district, the thing on the districts is they are in districts now, 7 districts, but the argument on the district is whether or not you should only vote in that district or not.
Right.
That's the argument. And if you only vote in that district, those people can get around easier. Now you run in the district, let's say from North Portland, where I ran, and Rita Moore is running, where Herman Green is running. They got to go all over the whole city.
Right.
They're all over the whole city, and it's a lot harder. But there's a reverse problem too if you went to districts. And the reverse problem is if you're only in the district, suppose you got 2 people in the district who are your 2 best people. Now it's a problem now. Now is the worst of both worlds. If you got, let's say, you had 2 really good people and they're in the same district, only one can run from the school board.
Right.
It used to be when you and I first sat at school board meetings way back in the 70s, and we would often sit together, but it used to be you could choose wherever you wanted to run. So you could run in this election, and then next election you could choose another number and run. So you got more people running who were, in a way, kind of more oriented towards the schools. You didn't really get very many weak candidates who weren't paying much attention and didn't, because you could run any place you wanted. So Rita Moore could have run at the same time as somebody else in her district. And so there's 2 things to it. There's 2 things to it. And so I'm not sure. I kind of like the way they do it in, I think ESD does it. They have 5 people, they have 2 people run at large and 5 people in districts. So you could do 5 districts, have people in the districts, and you voted only in those districts, and then have 2 at large people. That would be a way to kind of deal with both things. I've always kind of favored that, but it's not district oriented. So
but again, the other thing is
I've only had to campaign in North Portland. Geez, I could have done door to door the whole place just about.
Well, see, you have done that big time, but it was a citywide deal.
But it was lawn signs, not door to door.
Right.
You can't really go door to door with a school board campaign. You just can't get people out to do that. Not the governor.
I'm glad we're having this discussion, and if you notice, again, to the viewing audience, I'm doing this purposely because you need this background. You're not going to get this background within the various media, like in all due respect to the Observer, the Scanner, Oregonian, Tribune, and this, that, and other. Because in all due respect, these are sound bites. Those are sound bites. What we're doing, the actuality, that's what we need. Because this, I'm just throwing it right back to you, Steve. Because otherwise we got to do something different. If in fact we're going to get these kids educated, I mean, the only thing I see is the future is not there for them. Only in private school or something of that nature. I know that.
Yeah, there's some, like I say, there's some really good education going on in Portland. It's just not universal is the problem, and a lot of it is based on the idea that if you're in a more well-to-do neighborhood, you get a better education for a lot of different various reasons, including for the last 30 years, the well-to-do group of people has controlled the school board, and they moved resources and made it so that they can get more resources. Now, it's a hard thing to see, but I think it was the best. It's the most important problem in the system. It's not an equal system. If you go to Beaverton is an equal system. If you're a fifth grade in Beaverton, you get the same thing as any fifth grader in any of the schools in Beaverton. When I taught up in Evergreen in Vancouver, there were seven middle schools. They all had basically the same things in them. Well, that's not how Portland works, but it's not just, but you can't even find it. You can't even look and see what the real differences are because they're not transparent about where the money that pays for your staff comes from even. There's several different sources. And so you can fudge those sources a lot. Now, when the last year I was on the school board, Paul Anthony and I and the interim superintendent man by the name of Yusef Awad, who they fired, but he was a great guy and he's very smart and a terrific guy. They fired him. They paid him $650,000 because they fired him inappropriately. They agreed to pay him that much. That was the maximum you could under the law. He could have got more probably. But we set up a committee that was going to deal with two really important things. And one was that the elementary schools, particularly kindergarten through eighth grade, so it could be a K-8, it could be a middle school, could be an elementary school, they do not have equal programs. So if you're in one school, you get a better deal than in another school. That's not right. Everybody, we're all one district. Everybody in the fifth grade, everybody in the sixth, you don't have to have identical, you just have to have equal programs. So if we get library in this school, library in that school, we get art in this school, maybe in the other school we might have something similar to art or something different, but it should be the same. Well, we set up a committee and that committee was going to fix that. And they were going to fix the other problem that's a major problem in the district in its structure is that special programs need to be equitable. In other words, if you have a special reading or if you have a ESL, it should be equitable. In other words, if I got 50 kids who are in my school who are way behind in reading, I should get more reading help than a school that has 10 kids who are way behind. But that's not exactly how it works. It's the formula is not clear. And we set up a system that was going to do that. And that was the best thing I did on the school board, hands down. It was a great move. And I had harassed people, been working on it for years and years. Well, in comes the new superintendent and Julia Brim Edwards as the new board chairperson. And I asked Julia, I said, hey, Julia, can you lead me on this committee? Because I was really spearheading it because Paul and I spent a lot of time trying to understand it and how it works. And she said, well, let me see, Steve. And the superintendent and her dumped that committee. Dumped it. Don't need to be equal. So you can just drive around to the schools. If somebody out there in your audience wants to drive around to the 3 poorest schools and drive around to the 3 most well-to-do schools. Just look at the grounds, let alone the programs.
Buildings.
Yeah, well, it's not as much the buildings because they were all built in different deal, but it's the grounds and the buildings are. I'll tell you one thing that I saw in the buildings. They're cleaner in the more well-to-do neighborhoods than they are in the others.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just this, and it's not right. It's wrong for it to be this way, and no one will deal with it. Rita Moore understood it and came on the school board, but never dealt with it.
What happened? I remember that.
It's the same thing. It's a boy. You're going to go up and you're going to say, okay, we're going to give you more at this school. Well, where's that coming from? That may be coming from this school up here. See, and the more well-to-do schools, they run the system by controlling the school board, controlling who the superintendent is, and those types of things. But they don't do it in an arrogant manner like they used to. It used to just be this arrogant manner. Now it's more subtle than that. It's and you get rewarded as an administrator, though I'll tell you, there's a couple really good administrators they have right now in Portland. I really like them. But you get rewarded as administrator by going along. In fact, Guerrero, one of the things that I seem to have noticed about him is he doesn't want you to say something different than what he thinks or wants. And you can't improve stuff with that kind of an attitude. You know, you can kind of make incremental improvements and go forward, but there's some things that need to change. He wouldn't deal with this. What I'm talking about, they dumped a committee that was dealing with it. Did they replace it with anything? No. And it's just, and it makes it hard on his administrators, I think, because if they've got a good idea, or somebody on the school board has a good idea, if they're disagreeing with him, it's a tough problem for you. You don't want to do that. So you want to keep that stuff kind of under wraps. If we're going to equalize the poorer schools with the more well-to-do schools in their neighborhoods, we're going to equalize that. Oh, good luck. Good luck.
See, I mean, you bring out some pretty heavy points at this point in time. Because what comes to mind right off the bat was the bond measure, the latest big bond measure. Remember that one?
The latest bond measure is a pretty good one, but boy, let's go back to the one we did.
Oh my God!
2017, I was on the board a day. Oh man,
Woo.
It came up $250 million short. All right, $250 million short. Now, it's not that the money's missing. It's that they're short-handed. They said, we're going to do this, and we're $250 million short. So what they did was say this. They said, well, it was the old board, which I was on. It was Yusef Awad who put it together, or Jerry Vincent, who was the main guy who put it together, and they shortchanged it. And some people even suggested they shortchanged it on purpose, which I figured the odds of that happening were 1 billion to 1. Jerry Vincent had run 17 bonds previously. That's why Awad hired him. And they weren't trying to shortchange anything. And in fact, then they said there wasn't any documents for setting it up. Well, when I talked to Yusef Awad, he said, yeah, there were documents, Steve. They just don't want to show them. There were documents. And then they did an audit. And the audit, to find where that 250 million short came up, the audit didn't even interview Awad, the man who was in charge. And they didn't check and see if they were losing money now in some manner, which there's a good chance that they possibly are, but they wouldn't investigate that. I called Rita Moore and said, Rita, 250 million short, I got some really good ideas of what happened here. And she said, well, tell me. And I said, no, I'm not talking to you, but I'll talk to the superintendent and have him call me. And that was because the way she'd been treating me, totally opposite of what she'd said. I said, but I'll talk to the superintendent, have him call me. No, nobody. The auditor talked to me, but the auditor never changed the audit to look and talk to Awad because he was suing the school district, see, at the time. And so they didn't want to talk to him. But Wad's a good guy. He would have talked to him. He told me. He said, sure, I'd have talked to him, Steve, if they'd have called, but they didn't call. The guy who did it and the 250 million short. I'm telling you, they just passed another bond. Okay, good. We need those bonds. They need those bonds to keep moving along. But what are they going to do with this other bond? Is the money going to be 250 million short yet? Since they really don't know what happened to the other 250 million. It really gets the hairs on my back up, man, because that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
See, I'm glad you made that point because you knew what my position was during that particular time. Because, I mean, I look at Jefferson High School and I'm still saying there were several bonds and all talked about the construction and all the goodies and this, that, and the other. And Jefferson High School is still sitting there right next to PCC, waiting, if you will, to be picked up.
Well, Lincoln ain't.
See, I mean, it's so.
I think Jefferson High School was supposed to be in this new bond. Maybe it is. I mean, Jefferson was. No. They came up short. They came up with money short on Benson, and they came up with other money short, and that makes it. That's so. I don't know exactly how it's going to come out.
Well, then there's the one downtown. The school down
is in this bond. See?
Well, but like I said, I think they sort of said that the last time get the vote. I remember when they were having the debates on that piece, when they had it on Channel 2, news aspect of it, and people were bringing up the concern about what are we going to do with Jefferson High School, because it was definitely in need of repair and the whole 9 yards. It was just
Yeah.
that bad thing, and it's still sitting in the same situation. And I guess my point, I'm bringing the other issue back up about districtization, like you were talking about the monies. I mean, parents are going to take care of their kids whatever way they can, right? You got me? And the people with the monies, if you will make sure that kid get educated. If they don't have it, they'll take it out of their pockets. Or if they know how to take it from the voters, they'll do that too. Got me? Any way, shape, or form, a parent will make sure that their kid, if they've got the capacity and the money, they will do it that way. So we've got to have school board members that are aware of that, to make sure, just like yourself, if you will, to make sure that everything is across the board, is equal across the board, and make it happen other ways, but make sure that it does happen. Like you said, if it's,
Make sure the money's there.
yeah, but see, that's why I'm saying districtization is key. What about the chair of the school board? I mean, it's always been the same that I've known for the years that I've known. And those are the ones that are signing the checks, right?
They had the previous bonds were pretty close. They did a pretty good job of putting out the money on the previous bonds. It was a bond from 2017 that they were $250 million short of what they promised. That
But
was,
that was
so
after
the
they had
question's
passed
got to be, what about the bond now? Are they going to be short the same way? Are they making the same mistakes since they didn't realize any mistakes they made last time, basically?
Okay.
They changed a lot of things and said, well, we didn't make any mistakes, but they still changed things.
Yes.
So those two things don't.
Some don't jive. It don't jive. You're right.
They don't.
You're right. Well, look like we're at that point now. We're about ready to close at this point in time. I'm so glad you've come here. What are your last comments? Any other comments you'd like to share with these folks and the voters?
There's a kid by the name of Brooklyn Sherman who is running. I've talked to him about 15 times. He's a great kid. Got some really nifty ideas. People ought to look at him too.
What was his name again?
Brooklyn Sherman.
Oh yes, he's in the port.
He's a good kid, and he's running. He's a 19-year-old running for the school board. And everybody kind of says, "Oh, 19." But he's a good kid. He's a good kid, and he's put together a nice little campaign, and he has some good ideas that people, even though he's not going to win, but he got some good ideas hanging around there that people might pick up on. If you're running for the school board out there, or you're working with somebody, and you're talking about, I'm going to do these good things. So when you get in the school board, don't be afraid to do them, and be focused on those kids. Don't be focused on the other adults and being important or having influence. Focus on what's good for children. That's your job on the school board.
Well, this has been great. This is kind of like a team effort aspect that we want to make sure we get the job done. We want to make sure that that Steve I'm sure glad seriously, Steve, we're sure glad you came over and shared some thoughts with you. I'm sure that the voting public will really listen to what you have to say as usual. But like you said, things have to change in Portland. We have to change. We've got to change for the betterment. I mean, this is the largest school district that we have in the state of Oregon, for that matter. And in most cases, the largest population of minorities. Not that many, but basically most of the majority of them come from the Portland metropolitan area. Okay? So it's very, very important that we make sure we educate these futures. Very, very important. Take care, folks. We'll see you next time around.